Shikamaru's blood stained the snow while Temari plummeted to her death. The leaf's genius couldn't think. The cold froze his bones. The sand kunoichi screamed. A mission turned into a brutal massacre. The paradox of survival. Let's rewind the tape right now. 8 hours earlier, everything was completely peaceful. Shikamaru hated bureaucratic missions. Temari just wanted to go home. A dark deal changed everything. You're not going to believe this. The trip felt like just another boring day at the office because the sun was shining bright and the roads were totally empty. Shikamaru was dragging his feet and Temari kept complaining about his sluggishness because she was always impatient and laser-focused. But that calm was just a setup because the air started smelling like rusty iron. Then the blue sky turned pitch black in seconds and a lethal blizzard swallowed them both in the blink of an eye. You need to understand that this wasn't a natural storm because the chakra all around them was dark and super suffocating. Shikamaru tried to activate his shadows, but the snow reflected the light and completely canceled out his defensive technique. Temari pulled out her giant fan and sliced the air with raw violence, but the wind bounced back like blades of solid ice. They were surrounded by invisible enemies, and the peaceful mission turned out to be a lethal ambush. Then a deafening sound shattered the mountain silence, and the ground literally vanished right from under the sand delegation. The guards were swallowed by a dark rift and disappeared without a trace because the attack was surgical and completely cowardly. Temari slipped toward the edge of the cliff, but Shikamaru grabbed her hand at the absolute last second. The lazy genius didn't even hesitate and jumped right into the abyss with her because he would never let her die alone. I promise you this fall is going to change everything you know about the hidden feelings of the Nara clan. They plummeted into the dark void, and the wind sliced their skin like ruthless and cruel razors. Shikamaru hugged Temari in midair and used his own body as a shield because the drop would be fatal for any regular shinobi. They smashed into the rocks and rolled right into a hidden cave, and the impact broke the silence with a terrifying crash. The darkness inside the cave was absolute, and the freezing cold was already starting to ice up their breathing real fast. Shikamaru coughed up blood and tried to get up, but a mind-numbing pain ripped through his chest and dropped him to his knees on the stone. Temari crawled over to him in total panic and used her own clothes to stop the deep and open wound. It was the first time you'd ever see genuine terror in the princess's eyes because she was completely vulnerable and fragile. They knew the blizzard outside would destroy any chance of survival, so the only logical way out was to stay and endure it. But the temperature dropped drastically and the ice started taking over the walls of that dark and deadly shelter. Temari hugged her own body and her lips turned purple because her chakra was at its absolute limit after trying to cushion the fall. Shikamaru looked at her and realized that hypothermia would kill her in minutes if he didn't take extreme action. The genius always found a rational way out of everything, but right now logic didn't matter because his heart was screaming louder. He took off his bloodstained vest and pulled Temari against his own chest to try and share whatever vital heat he had left. He tried to pull away out of pure instinct and pride, but his arms locked her in with a grip full of desperation and pure protection. The heat from his body clashed against the ice of her skin, and an unprecedented spark of romance started to ignite in the dark. Their heavy breathing mixed together in the freezing cold, and Shikamaru finally closed his eyes, taking in the sweet scent of her hair. But that calm didn't last long because a massive shadow projected itself at the cave's entrance, blocking their only airway. Invisible enemies had tracked their blood, and now the secret shelter was about to become their tomb or the stage for an insane bloodbath. You have no idea what Shikamaru is going to sacrifice to keep her alive during the next 5 minutes of absolute darkness. The monstrous silhouette blocked the only light source in the cave, and Temari's heart literally skipped a beat. Shikamaru held his breath and covered her mouth with his hand, because the slightest sound would be a total death sentence. The enemies were sniffing out the blood stained on the rock, but the pitch-black darkness of the hole played right into the Nara clan's hands. He expanded his shadow completely silently and sealed the entrance with a thick barrier of chakra and stone. The hunter roared in frustration outside and kept patrolling through the blizzard hunting for his prey. The immediate danger was gone, but the lethal cold went right back to biting their skin with an even crueler force. The shadow barrier cut off the freezing wind, but turned the shelter into a dark and completely isolated ice tomb. Temari was shaking uncontrollably, and her suppressed crying tore through the heavy silence of that makeshift grave. Shikamaru knew their chakra was at a critical limit, and the cold wouldn't forgive a single tactical mistake. He needed to make a drastic choice to keep the woman he loved from freezing to death right there. He pulled Temari to the back of the cave and sat her on the stone floor while taking off the rest of his own armor. The Sand Princess tried to protest and push him away because her pride had always been a very strong shield. But he ignored the weak punches on his chest and wrapped her in a firm and desperate hug to share his body heat. Her freezing skin pressed against his warm chest, and a deep shiver ran down both their spines at the exact same time. You can tell that the real war right now wasn't against the rogues, but against their very own vulnerability. The silence of the embrace revealed truths they had kept hidden for years, and their breathing started to sync up in the dark. Shikamaru buried his face in her shoulder and took in the sweet smell of her hair that contrasted with the metallic scent of blood. Temari stopped fighting and finally gave in to the exhaustion because she had never felt so safe in her entire life. The ninja's rough hands caressed her back, and the friction created little waves of life against the lethal ice. The sand girl closed her eyes and let the very first tear of pure relief wet the boy's neck. You have to understand that this closeness was super dangerous for the minds of two strategic geniuses who were always calculating and closed off. The emotional wall crumbled all at once, and Temari whispered that she was terrified she wouldn't live to see the sunrise. Shikamaru tightened his grip and swore with a raspy voice that he would give his own blood to keep her alive until dawn. The words came out loaded with an absolute feeling that neither of them had the guts to admit in broad daylight. Her heart raced in a crazy way, and the sound of her heartbeat echoed in his chest like a loud war drum. The body heat stopped the initial hypothermia, but the room temperature kept dropping at a scary and constant rate. Shikamaru felt his fingertips going numb and realized he needed to keep Temari's mind active so she wouldn't pass out. He started talking about their first match and how he thought she was the most annoying and fascinating girl in the entire world. She let out a weak laugh in the freezing cold and confessed she always found his laziness to be a mysterious and super captivating charm. The sweet confessions warmed their souls while the ice mercilessly devoured the cave without stopping for a single second. Temari's face tilted up in the darkness, and the faint light revealed her green eyes shining really intensely. The distance between their faces was just a few inches, and their warm breaths melted together, creating a thick white mist. Shikamaru completely lost his mind and moved his hand to touch her cheek with a gentleness he didn't even know he had. She leaned her face into his touch and closed her eyes, waiting for the moment they had put off for way too long. But the ninja world is totally cruel, and peace never lasts long enough for two hearts in love to beat in sync. The ground shook with an absurd violence, and chunks of ice crashed down from the cave, shattering the couple's trance. A deafening explosion blew apart the shadow barrier, and the moonlight flooded the shelter along with a blast of cutting wind. The enemies hadn't left at all and brought heavy reinforcements to blow up the entire mountain and bury their sand prey alive. Shikamaru shielded Temari from the debris with his own body and felt a sharp rock tear through his back with painful force. The magical moment was completely destroyed, and death knocked on their door with a blind and uncontrollable red fury. Temari screamed in pure terror when she saw his blood staining the fresh snow blowing through the wide and lit-up crack in the cave. She tried to stand up to grab her fan, but her legs were totally numb and her body collapsed back onto the freezing floor. Shikamaru spat blood and stood up slowly because the rage burning inside him easily overpowered any physical pain or strategic calculation he had. The genius's eyes turned ice cold, and he glared at the assassins with the most lethal intent the Hidden Leaf had ever witnessed. He crossed his fingers into a forbidden seal, and you're going to be totally shocked by what love forced him to do. The shadow chakra started distorting the air around him, and the room temperature plummeted even further because of the massive energy. Temari realized exactly what technique he was about to use and screamed, begging him stop, because it would cost him his life in minutes. But Shikamaru just looked back at her over his shoulder and smiled with an impossible tenderness right in the middle of that deadly chaos. He told her his life had zero value if she wasn't in it, and absolute darkness exploded from his body, completely blacking out the moon. The deadly jutsu swallowed the entire mountain, but the worst villain was still hiding in the shadows, waiting for the exact right moment to strike. Pure darkness swallowed the cave, and the assassin's screams ripped through the freezing night, because Shikamaru's jutsu was completely merciless. The shadows morphed into solid spears and pierced the snow with a brutality that left the Sand Princess in absolute shock. Temari felt his chakra burn up all the oxygen around them, and the impact's shockwave blew the enemies right out of the shelter. But the energy this technique demanded was totally insane, and the Leaf Ninja's body started giving out in a really terrifying way. Blood dripped from Shikamaru's eyes, and he dropped to his knees on the stained snow because the human limit was totally shattered. Temari ignored the pain in her legs and dragged herself over to him with her heart racing at a desperate and frantic speed. She hugged his back and begged him to undo the jutsu, but the remaining enemies started fighting back with brute force. The Kunoichi realized she had to step up and fight too, so she grabbed her giant fan and forced herself up to protect the man she loved. The deadly silence was broken by a sadistic laugh, and the true leader of the assassins stepped out from the blizzard shadows. He was a deformed giant, carrying a massive axe coated in lightning chakra that sparked brightly in the pitch black. The monster charged at Temari with a terrifying speed, and she barely had enough time to snap her fan open to block it. The clash shattered the icy floor and sent the girl flying against the stone wall with an absolutely devastating force. Shikamaru saw the love of his life, coughing up blood, and blind rage totally hijacked his genius brain all over again. He pushed his own veins to the breaking point and linked his shadows directly to the wind still swirling around Temari's fallen body. The Sand Princess figured out his plan in a split second and pushed every last breath from her lungs into one final massive blast. Shikamaru's shadows completely swallowed Temari's lethal gale, and the legendary Tempest Shadow was born in that exact second. The fused chakras created a pitch-black hurricane that tore the mountain apart and wiped out the blizzard for miles around. The rogue leader tried to run away, but the storm of shadows sucked his body right in with an absolute gravitational pull. Invisible wind blades sliced through the air and silenced the giant forever, because nobody escapes the combined wrath of the leaf and the sand. The monster hit the ground totally lifeless, and the mountain finally sank back into a calm and completely empty and peaceful silence. The dark hurricane faded away, and the silver moonlight shined down on the rubble and the bodies scattered across the fresh snow. Shikamaru lost all his remaining strength and collapsed onto the frozen ground because his chakra was drained and his body was wrecked. Temari dropped her fan and sprinted to him, ignoring her own total exhaustion because the sheer terror of losing him was screaming in her mind. She pulled his head on her lap and broke down, crying uncontrollably in a wave of deep and completely overwhelming relief. The princess's warm tears splashed onto Shikamaru's dirt-streaked face, and he slowly opened his eyes, flashing a really weak smile. He lifted his blood-stained hand and wiped her cheek with a gentleness that totally clashed with the insane bloodbath all around them. Temari held his hand tightly against her face and whispered that he was the biggest idiot in the world for almost dying today. He let out a soft laugh and said he would die 1,000 times over if it meant seeing her beautiful smile just one more time. The survival adrenaline started to fade, and the fear of death made room for an intense and completely undeniable desire. The two of them were totally alone at the top of the mountain, and the extreme vulnerability ripped off all the masks they wore back in society. Temari stared at his bruised lips, and her heart went off like a silent thunderbolt inside her pretty battered chest. Shikamaru gently pulled her neck down, and the remaining space between them completely vanished into thin air. Their very first kiss tasted like salt from the blood and tears, but it was the absolute sweetest thing they had ever experienced. Their lips touched kind of shyly at first, but then years of bottled-up passion just exploded in a wave of pure need. Temari tangled her fingers into his hair, and Shikamaru gripped her waist with possessiveness and a whole lot of love he had repressed for years. The mountain's freezing cold disappeared entirely, and their whole world shrank down to the heat of that incredibly magical and super secret moment. They pulled apart, gasping for air, and rested their foreheads together with goofy smiles lighting up their completely exhausted faces. The Sand Princess realized right then and there that she could never live without that lazy and charming tactical genius ever again. Shikamaru promised himself he was going to ask the Kazekage for her hand the second they stepped foot on the hot sand again. But a loud metallic clank echoed from the rocks right above them, and cruel reality slashed through their romance like a sharp knife. The moonlight got blocked out by dozens of identical silhouettes popping up along the edges of the totally wrecked cliffside. The couple's eyes went wide because the faces of these new enemies were super familiar and had absolutely no business being there right now. These ninjas weren't random mercenaries at all, but elite Umbu members from the hidden sand village holding heavily blood-stained weapons. One of them slowly pulled off his mask, and the sheer shock made Temari's heart stop beating the second she recognized who it was. The revealed face smirked cynically, and the ground shook with a crushing presence that neither of them ever expected to feel out there. Shikamaru tried to stand up, but his shadows wouldn't answer him because an invisible seal had his body totally locked to the freezing floor. The Umbu leader's familiar voice echoed through the ravine, spitting out words that completely shattered every certainty the loving couple had. The whole trap was never actually meant to kill them, but to test the Nara air, and the direct order came straight for the Kazekage himself. The Umbu pulled off the porcelain mask, and Kankaro's face showed up fully lit by the pale light of the full moon. Temari literally choked on her own blood because she couldn't believe her own brother's cruel betrayal right in the middle of a blizzard. Shikamaru tried to move, but the paralysis seal was way too strong, and he growled out of pure rage and total frustration. Kankaro gave a half smile and warned them that the Kazekage needed absolute certainty that the Nara would actually die for their sister. The whole mission was just a sick play, and the dead guards were nothing but illusions from a high-level genjutsu. Furious rage took over Temari's dirt-streaked face, and she stumbled to her feet because her legendary pride was screaming the loudest. She yelled right at Kankaro and told him this sick joke almost cost the life of the very man she loved so much. The puppet master crossed his arms and fired back that the sand doesn't just hand over its royalty to any random cowardly kid. Shikamaru heard those words, and his genius brain instantly snapped the scattered pieces together because Gaara's test was completely brutal. The Kazekage wanted to test the Leaf Genius's capacity for sacrifice before greenlighting a future and super risky political marriage. The Umbus dropped the ceiling barrier, and Shikamaru finally managed to get up from the freezing floor covered in stained snow. He didn't take a single step back and walked right up to Kankaro with eyes burning with a sheer determination that spooked the sand elite. The Nara glared at Temari's brother and promised he would burn their entire village down if they ever tried to hurt her like that again. Kankaro laughed out loud and tossed a sacred scroll bearing the Kazekage's golden seal straight into the wounded ninja's hands. The document carried Gaara's official blessing for their relationship to exist without any kind of political or diplomatic interference. The insane tension instantly vanished from the freezing air, and the snowstorm finally started to die down and turn into total calm. The Sand Ninjas saluted Shikamaru out of pure respect because he had just passed the most insane survival test of all time. Temari couldn't handle the heavy weight of the relief anymore and ran to hug her Nara with a force that made him groan in sheer pain. He held the scroll in one hand and stroked her hair with the other while flashing a completely relaxed and totally relieved smile. The nightmare on the mountain was finally over, and the sun started tearing through the dark clouds, announcing a brand new and warm dawn. Kankaro and his Umbus vanished into the shadows of the trees, leaving the couple completely alone at the top of the snowy world again. Shikamaru stared down at the crumpled scroll and realized his future was now permanently tied to the destiny of the hidden sand. He literally ripped the official document to shreds and threw the pieces into the cold breeze because their love didn't need anyone's permission. Temari's eyes went wide at how bold he was being, but she quickly broke into a huge smile full of deep admiration. He grabbed both of her hands and told her they were going to write their own story without giving a damn about villages or stupid rules. The first rays of sunlight hit their bruised faces and showed off the pure beauty of that super anticipated and hard-earned moment. Shikamaru wiped the very last tear off Temari's cheek and kissed her forehead with an endless and extremely protective sweetness. She rested her head against his chest and listened to his heart beating super calm and strong and full of totally abundant life. The hike back to the village was going to be long and pretty painful but they were going to take every single step together and holding hands. Soon as pride and the Leaf's laziness finally surrendered to the most true and invincible feeling in this entire ninja world. The journey down the mountain was super quiet because words weren't really needed to express what they were feeling right then. They leaned on each other for support, and with every stumble on the rocks, they traded looks packed with heavily unspoken promises. The warmth of the sun melted the ice off the trees, and it also melted away the very last walls of insecurity standing between them. Shikamaru pictured the exact look on Naruto's face when he heard the news and smiled, just thinking about the loud screaming and the massive party. Temari thought about Gaara's reaction and crossed her fingers, hoping her brother was really ready to deal with all her impulsive choices. They took a break near a crystal-clear stream to wash off the dry blood and drink some fresh and incredibly pure water. Their reflection in the water showed two physically wrecked shinobis, but with totally glowing souls connected in a very epic way. Shikamaru splashed water on his face and stared at Temari's reflection in the current because he wanted to burn that image into his brain forever. She noticed him staring and splashed a handful of freezing water right in his face before letting out a loud and super contagious laugh. The sound of her laughing echoed through the woods and scared away the last ghosts of fear that were still haunting his mind. The gates of the hidden Leaf Village finally popped up on the horizon, and the giant doors signaled the end of that insane ordeal. The guard Izumo and Kotetsu totally bugged out when they saw the couple's pathetic state and sprinted over to offer medical help. Shikamaru waved off their support and told them the only thing he needed right now was a warm bed and a whole lot of silence. Temari squeezed his hand a little tighter, and the two of them walked through Konoha's gates, not as allies, but as lovers. The gossip would spread through the village in a matter of minutes, and Shikamaru's quiet life would be over for good. The sun was setting in Konoha, painting the sky bright orange, and the couple was resting up on the Nara clan's roof. Shikamaru rested his head on Temari's lap, and she ran her fingers through his dark hair while they just watched the clouds roll by. Total peace took over, and their story got its totally perfect ending because love actually beat the darkness and the brutal tests. But a black messenger hawk dove down from the sky and dropped a note right into Temari's hands bearing the Sand's official seal. The note said the wedding was happening in exactly 3 days, and Gaara demanded a death match against Shikamaru before the actual ceremony. If you were totally shocked by this insane plot twist, then you need to subscribe to the channel right now and smash that like button. The duel between Gaara and Shikamaru is going to be the craziest thing you've ever seen, and the video is already up on the channel. Don't forget to drop a comment saying what you thought about this sweet romance, because I really want to know your honest opinion on the story. I had a total blast writing this journey, and I hope you felt all the hype and adrenaline of this super intense script. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you in the next ninja battle with way more hype and crazy twists.